Hello. Welcome back. We are gonna have it's so funny. It's We're gonna have the birds and the bees talk about enlightenment. That's the way I think about this. I feel like before we start this path on the spiritual journey, one thing that I would have loved to have, which I did not have, was this birds and the bees talk of what is enlightenment, what is the spiritual journey, and what I suppose, like, how do I know I'm in the right place? What am I looking for? Am I looking for anything? Should I stop looking? Um, and today we're going to talk about that. This very um, simple but important talk. I don't know if it's simple, but like interesting but important talk that would have saved me so many years of walking in the wrong direction, so to speak. And ultimately, the truth is that it wasn't in the wrong direction; it was in the right direction. But I just had to go the wrong direction to find that I was going in the wrong direction. So it was still the right direction. It's all just how you see it. So we're going to talk about some paradoxes that happen and things that don't make sense. We're going to talk about why this world doesn't make sense, and what to expect in that. Um, and we're going to talk about enlightenment. So let's do it. So enlightenment. Okay, let's talk about. It's like, where do we start? Let's talk about the natural world, and then we'll talk about enlightenment. So when we look at the natural world, and when I say that, I mean nature. If you go out into the forest, into the woods, into on the beach, anywhere in the natural world rather than the man-made world, um, you'll start to see you'll see a few things. One is that there seems to be no order in which things are happening, like no logical framework necessarily. There aren't lines, there aren't well cut anything. Things just kind of grow, and they grow together and they intertwine, and some intertwine and some don't intertwine, and some are friends and some are like enemies. And when you look at this cycle of nature, you see that it is unbelievably beautiful. It is not perfect in a way that we as humans in our society have kind of deemed the idea of perfect, of having like a rigidity or a structure. So it's like unstructured, um, which is debatable, but it's not in boxes. It's natural in a way, right? Like organic is almost like out of the box. And what's interesting about nature is that there seems to be a force guiding everything. That there isn't necessarily a plan, but there are just, when you go anywhere, things just grow and evolve, and there seems to be something guiding that, some force. In Taoists, they call this the Tao. Life force, consciousness, God, divinity, the divine, great spirit, whatever you want to call it. There seems to be this pulse that is motivating everything to grow toward the sun. So something interesting we notice is that if I was a farmer and I planted 10 different types of seeds, different flowers and trees, all in the same day, logically we would think that they would grow at the same time. But what we see happens is different species grow at different times. Different types of flowers, even different flowers, bloom on different days, even if they're the same species, in the same conditions. They might bloom a day after, or 2 days, or a week, or... And that's like our spiritual journey, is that things just kind of bloom when they're ready. Now, the truth is, like, we need to plant them, um, but then they just bloom when they're ready, when it's time, if we take care of them. And that's like how we can nurture our spiritual path. But the other truth is that you don't even really have to plant or water anything. When we arrived here on planet Earth, there's just trees and vegetation and things everywhere. So on one end, there's value in planting and growing and nurturing. And on the other hand, we see that we don't really even have to do that. Nature seems to take care of itself. So we can intertwine with that process, and there's value to that. But also knowing that really nothing even needs to happen. It's everything is moving toward regeneration and growing and evolving. So that's kind of like our spiritual path as well. We can, when we look at nature, we can see like a very similar path in our spiritual path. The teacher Adyashanti says that our spiritual journey starts when we stop seeking. So ultimately what he's saying is that when we come back to wholeness, when we come back to feeling enough, feeling lovable, feeling like whole without needing anything outside to contribute to that, when we stop trying to fill the void, that's when our spiritual journey starts. And what he's really saying is that the process of self-realization, they call it self-realization, is enlightenment. It's like the realization that I am not simply my body, but that's only a piece of big me. It's like little me, big me. Big me is like the soul, a great spirit. We talked about it a few lessons back. It's like the ice cream. So self-realization is the recognition that I am both ice cream and chocolate. I'm both Sam in my little body and big soul, which is everything at the same time. That's self-realization. That's enlightenment. And it's not like this idea, it's like the physical experience of that truth. Oh, realizing that the self that I thought I was, this psychological self, the ego, is only a part of me. It arises within me. That's where the journey starts. The spiritual journey starts at enlightenment, realizing that I'm not who I thought I was. And then a crazy journey starts from there, because it's like, whoa, if I'm not who I thought I was, and now I'm everything, think about how that changes your life, the way that life lives through you. And that's what starts happening, is once you realize that it's not just me, that I'm really connected to everything, that I start to recognize that there's something that's guiding me. There's something that is moving through me, that's beating my heart for me. I'm not beating my heart. If my body told my mind, hey, can you take care of the body for like an hour? I'm just gonna go to bed. I would probably die. Like, my mind isn't capable of doing what my body is capable of. There's so much intelligence in the body, beating my heart, moving my blood. I mean, like, there's so many processes that are happening without my conscious awareness, that are happening through this subtle pulse. That's this intelligence. The body's intelligence. The mind has intelligence. The body has intelligence. Nature has intelligence. Each plant has intelligence. And so the spiritual journey starts once we realize ourselves. That's like the first step. Everything else is getting to that moment, because if you think about how our society has worked, it's actually, consumerism is based on needing you to feel empty, needing you to feel not enough, so that you will purchase products that will, for a period of time, fulfill you, or fill you the void. But then when it's gone, then the void's back, and then you have to buy more, and it's an endless cycle. It's a wonderful paradigm. It's a great model for consumerism, but it's not so great for our spiritual path, where we are connected to everything. Because when we're feeling empty, we feel separated from everything. We feel not good enough. We need something outside of us. Already there's separation there. I need something outside of myself to fulfill me. That's separation. Once we start to feel whole, we realize, oh, I actually don't need anything outside. And what does outside even really mean? I see that I'm really connected to everything. And that's the process that unfolds. So the way I think about getting to that first step, which is, let's say, enlightenment, is that think of it, this is the way I think of it. And it's quite a paradox. And now we're going to get into the paradoxes of the spiritual path, because it's super hilarious and really bizarre. And that's how you know you're on the right path. When things get really weird and you can't really explain them, that's when it's good. All right, so imagine that, let's say you're on this spiritual journey and you're meditating, you're trying so hard to meditate, and you go to all the right meditation places and talk to the right masters, and you go to the yoga classes and you fly to India and do the India thing. And all of this is seeking to get to that enlightenment, that's whatever we're thinking it is. Bliss state. People believe that that's the case, and that's not really, we'll kind of get to that in a minute. So you're running and running and running, and it's like you're trying to get into this room. And you're doing all the techniques to get into the room, but the more that you want to get into the room, the more the barrier around the room hardens. So the more you're trying, the more the barrier strengthens and you can't get into the room. So you're trying and trying and trying, and you're trying even harder now because you're like, well, I'm going to try harder to penetrate the border, the wall around it. And then after a period of time, you quit. You're just like, fuck this. I don't want to do this anymore. And you sit down on the couch, and all of a sudden you're in the room. And you're looking around, and you're going, oh my God, I'm in the room. I'm in this room. And then the mind does something funny. It says, I want to stay here. And so you try to stay. And you're like, oh, I'm going to do anything I can to stay here. And the second that happens, you're outside the room again. And you're like, okay, I need to get back in. That was incredible. That was the most incredible experience of my life. I felt connected to everything. I felt at one with everything. I felt this incredible experience. I need to get back there. And you're trying and trying and trying and trying. But guess what? The walls are hardening. The more you try, the more you can't get in. And then you quit again. And you're just like, okay, I'm just going to, I don't know what's happening. I quit. And the second you surrender, you're back in the room. And the second you want to stay in the room, you're out of the room. And this keeps going and going and going until you play this game enough times that you recognize that you were always in the room. You were always in the room. There was nowhere to go. That you just didn't recognize it because you were trying so hard to get somewhere you thought you wanted to be. But in the end, you realized that what you thought you were looking for wasn't that, and you've been here the whole time. It's almost like when your glasses are on your head and you're looking everywhere in the house and you can't find your glasses and they were on your head the whole time. Or like enlightenment is home, and you were born in your home, but you didn't realize that that was your home. And so you left your home looking for it. And you're looking and looking and looking, and then you just stop looking and go back to your house, and then you had this realization that, oh my God, this was it the whole time. I left looking for what I was in. And that's kind of the path to enlightenment. It's the more you try to seek, you're leaving to go seek. Seeking is from a place of not enough. Once you realize that you're enough, you realize there's nothing to seek. That you were enough the whole time. There's no such thing as being not enough versus being enough. You're always enough. It's just the remembrance. It's recognizing that, oh my God, I didn't even realize that everything was okay because I was thinking that it wasn't. I was thinking there was somewhere else that was better than here. And that's the idea of enlightenment. It's that enlightenment isn't this bliss state. It's not this, oh, everything's amazing now and there's no pain and no suffering. Rather, it's an I'm okay with all the pain and the suffering. That's still going to happen. It's just an acceptance of it. Because it's a deeper understanding on the body level and the mind level. It's this holistic understanding of what really is happening. On a deeper level, you're able to see past what seems to be happening on the surface level. You no longer look at the content of what's happening, rather you see the context of what's happening. I'm not worried about the story and the drama and the names of the people that seem, you can see beyond it. It's like a clarity. And that's, again, where the path starts. So, how not to get enlightened? Try to get enlightened. That's the only, that's the idea. is the more you try, the more you're not going to get there. That doesn't mean if you don't try, you will get there. It's almost like falling in love. You can't make yourself fall in love. Sometimes you just fall in love. You were at the grocery store, you weren't planning on it, you just fell in love. But the idea, both with love and the arising of enlightenment, is that you can orient yourself in a place where you're more likely to have that happen. So earlier, like when we were talking about planting versus things just grow, enlightenment sometimes just happens. You could be drinking a beer and hit enlightenment, this self-realization. But the spiritual practice, these meditative practices, the yogic practices, breath work, and all these things allow us to orient ourselves in a place where we're more likely, like the chances of self-realization are greater. It's like we're growing near where the sun is shining. Yeah, you can still grow in a place where the sun doesn't shine, but you're more likely to grow when the sun is shining on you. It doesn't mean you will, but you're more likely to because you're orienting yourself into a place. So it's like, oh, well, if I'm going to get enlightened potentially anyway after however many lifetimes, why would I even meditate? So that's the practice of meditation. That's the practice. All these spiritual practices aren't in order to achieve enlightenment. You can't do that. It's in order to create a fertile soil that when enlightenment arises, which it eventually will, whether it's this lifetime or more, that you'll be ready to support it. And that's another aspect too, is that oftentimes what happens, and it's the same with love, if you practice relating and you're living in community and you're orienting yourself into a space where you're more likely to have love rise, that when it does, you'll know how to navigate it. Whereas if you have never spoken to anybody and you have been in a little dark room your entire life, and the second you leave the dark room, you meet this person, you fall in love, you don't know what to do with it. It's such a big energy. It's such an immense experience that if we don't have practice, then we have a really challenging time navigating it. And that's the idea, is that meditation and all of these spiritual practices help us align ourselves in a way where we can actually contain, when I say contain, at least navigate and dance with the experience. So this is the idea that we can prime ourselves and get our being ready for a new experience, for the flower to bloom whenever it's ready to bloom. And that is the spiritual practice. It's almost like priming the soil for when it's time to start the journey. So I thought for a long time my spiritual journey started when I started meditating, but ultimately it really starts once we realize ourselves, and then a new journey begins, a deeper layer. It's not to say that my spiritual journey hadn't begun, but it's another layer. It's not from the mind anymore. It's from the heart, from the soul, from the deeper being. So we have these paradoxes, and one paradox, if we start to look at things on different layers, and why are they paradoxes? They're paradoxes because we're starting to see that life has many layers, that our experience and our reality has different layers, and so things make sense on one layer and don't make sense on the other layer when we put them together. And when we look at only one layer, from the layer of the mind, let's say, then our mind sees things often as polarity. That's the 3D world that we live in. It's either black or white. It can't be black and white together. It can't be tall and short together. But that's only in our 3D world. But there's another world that we are operating in as well. It's this more ethereal, invisible, energetic world. And when we look at this layer, we see that things can contradict the 3D world. And yet, at the same time, in this contradiction, that's just how it is. It's just what's happening. And that's what begins to be very fascinating. So, for example, we can look at our world of form. I definitely have a form. If I run into the wall has a form, I'll tell you that. If I drop a rock on my foot, it'll be painful. That there's density and mass, and we can see that, we interact in this. But what's fascinating is that when we start to zoom in through microscopes, we do this in Western science as well. When we zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom into the molecules of our body, we start to see on a foundational level that we're like 99.9% open space, void, like nothing. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. How can I, how can this form be on a canvas of nothing? How can this heavy rock I'm holding actually be composed of nothing, of void, of space? And that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. Yet at the same time, that's just how it is. It's a paradox. I am both nothing and something. I have both no mass and mass. That there's a canvas of nothingness that contains form, the form of us. Super fascinating. The other paradox that we spoke about is the only way to reach self-realization is to not try, because the more you want it, the more you're in your mind. The more you want it, the more attached you are. But it's like being attached to a state of non-attachment. It doesn't make any sense. I remember I was signed up for a 10-day Vipassana retreat. It's a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and it got canceled. And I was really upset. And I realized like how attached I was to the experience. I really, really, really wanted to go to this meditation retreat to practice non-attachment. And I realized that, wait, I could just practice it right now and let go of the retreat. And it was just this hilarious paradox of like, wow, I really, really, really want to go to learn not to really, really want anything. It's like running to pause. I have to go there to slow down, but I can just slow down right now. And so we have these paradoxes in life. And in the spiritual world, we see it all the time. Things don't make sense. It doesn't make sense that I plant all these flowers at the same time and they grow at different times. And yes, we can look behind it so that we can understand it, but it still doesn't make sense to our mind because it's bigger than our mind. Because if you think about it, just like we talked about earlier, it's like, where do our thoughts come from? They just seem to appear randomly. I'm not trying to think my thoughts. Sometimes I'll just be sitting and a thought will pop up, and it pops up from this darkness. There's this like emptiness that is my mind, or that is just there, and then my mind pops up in the middle, and then the thought goes away, back into the nothingness. So it's like there's nothingness on both sides of my thoughts, like the fish in the fishbowl. It's like there's a fishbowl of nothingness, and my thoughts are like the fish swimming. It just kind of pops up and then disappears, and then another fish pops up and disappears. And we can think about this as like a band, like an orchestra that is in a concert hall. That we have this huge, empty, spacious concert hall. And then one evening a band comes in and plays. And then the band leaves and the concert hall is still there. And then another band comes in, and even with the band playing the music, there's still a silence that holds the sound. The concert hall is still there. And most of us are identifying with the band, with the thoughts. I'm my thoughts. But the truth is that the band plays in the concert hall. Is there a chance that you're the concert hall? And then the paradox comes. Well, is there a chance that I'm the concert hall and the band playing inside? That I am what arises within me? And it doesn't make sense because our language is so limited that when we say the self or me or I, we have to explain what we're actually talking about, because self-realization is realizing that I'm not the self that I thought I was. I'm not simply my thoughts, but I am also what contains them. It's so fascinating when we start to see this, when we start to experience it. We experience the silence that's there before and after, And we experience the silence that's behind our thoughts. When our mind is crazy, I can still hear the silence. When the clouds are in the sky, I still know the sun is there. The clouds just cover it. The clouds just cover the silence. But the silence is still there. So that's the idea, that the deeper we get into this world, the more we start to see paradoxes. And the reason we see paradoxes is because we're living life on two different layers. When we only live our life in the Newtonian world, in this material 3D world, then things make sense. It's all about logic. But the spiritual path isn't logical. And what's interesting is that we will have the spiritual path, this invisible world that's not logical, it's not linear, it's just like all these crazy things are happening in the right timing versus when we want it to happen. And at the same time, we're still living this beautifully mundane life. So the spiritual path doesn't mean you're like living in the Himalayas and you're preaching and all these things. It could mean that you're an accountant going to work every day. That's the 3D world that you're living in, and at the same time, you're having a spiritual awakening. That the 3D world doesn't necessarily mirror the spiritual path in an essence. It doesn't mean that there's nothing that looks more spiritual than other things. There's no activity that is more or less spiritual. Rather, the spirituality comes from the approach at which we do anything. How you pay for your meal. How you drive your car. It's not that driving your car is any more or less spiritual. That's the whole concept, is that the church isn't more spiritual than the strip club. It's how you are interacting with the world around you. And that's what's so fascinating, because we have this idea, our mind has this idea of what it means to look or to be spiritual. But that's just a game, it's a trap. The truth is that everything is holy. It's our ability to see the holiness that brings the magic. That sometimes I'm doing the laundry and I am just like, oh my God, I'm connected to everything. And sometimes I'm in church or in a yoga class and not feeling it. And it's all just as holy. That's the whole point. When we stop seeking for a specific experience, then we see that the experience is already here. That everything is already here. Because I'm everything. And everything is me. And that me is made up of nothing. And everything is surrounded by nothing, is contained by nothing. Does that mean we're nothing? Yes. Does that mean we're everything? Yes. It's both. It's so interesting. There's a beautiful concept that we'll end with, and that's the difference between the shaman, the mystic, and the mentally ill is that the shaman and the mystic can swim in the sea that the mentally ill drown in. It's the same sea. The mystic and the shaman have practiced receiving how to navigate this world, whereas when we're not ready for it, it takes us out. So that's the practice. The practice is learning how to interact with these two worlds at the same time, to integrate them, to be in both worlds, to have one foot in the everything and one foot in the little me. Because if I'm only in the everything, then I don't care about my body anymore, because I know that I'm not my body, so it's just going to be recycled and I'll go back to the soup. But there's an importance of me being in a body. I'm tethered to this body. And so my little self is taking care of my body. So what does it look like when I'm in my little self taking care of my body, while also in my big self knowing that every action that I have impacts everything? Let's take a few deep breaths. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for this experience. It's so beautiful to talk about things that are so abstract, and try to bring them down into our world because they're big. And some things I'll say won't make any sense. Hopefully, everything. Some things I say won't land right now. But you'll be at a restaurant talking to somebody and they'll say something and that'll land. And that's the whole point. You can't force anything to happen. You just have to be open for it. The more open you are, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, but when it does, you'll be there and you'll catch it and you'll ride with it and dance with it. That's our only ability, is to open ourselves up for a possibility of recognizing our true self. Maybe it'll happen. You can't meditate your way to enlightenment. You can't do anything in your way to enlightenment. We just water our garden, and if it grows, it grows. That's awesome. And if not, then that's awesome too, because that's enlightenment. Not needing to become enlightened to realize that you're enlightened. All right, let's take 2 deep breaths, and then we'll do 3 ums. Deep inhale. Resting in the spaciousness, in the space of no self, in space beyond who I think I am. Resting in the place of knowing who I really am, what I really am. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat.